So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Leanne Chuboff, and I am the Vice President of Technical Affairs at SQF. Welcome to this webinar, Not Your Top Non-Conformances, but Should They Be? This webinar is an offshoot of SQF Unites in 2022 and was part of our hurricane edition of webinars since Hurricane Nicole came through and cut our conference short. We didn't want to lose these webinars, so we had one a couple weeks ago with Jeff Farrell at NSF about doing risk assessments, and now we gathered our all-star panel for this webinar today. So I'm going to introduce you to your panelists, but before we do that, I want to just give you a moment to review our antitrust statement. So SQF follows the antitrust statement through FMI. So please take a moment to review this statement. That's in front of you right now. Conversations regarding price fixing, boycotting, trade restrictions, or other violations of antitrust law are to be avoided. Fortunately, we talk about food safety, which is not competitive. So typically we don't have any issues, but if you believe that the conversation is in violation of the antitrust law, please speak up and we will do the same. Okay, so I want to introduce our host or hostess today, Tammy Van Buren. Tammy is the SQFI Compliance Manager. She is responsible for the oversight and execution of the SQF program, including the sites, the certification bodies, and the auditors themselves. So Tammy takes all the information that we get from the SQF audits and compiles them all and shares them with you. And this presentation today is going to be filled with a lot of good information. So I'm looking forward to this presentation. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Tammy. Tammy?
All right, thank you, Leanne. So I'm going to share just a little bit of information with you to get started, just to kind of see where we are on edition 9 and audits. You know, we've been going through this road. It'll be 2 years in May. And so we've had a lot of edition 9 audits. And so the data today, the information presented today is going to be based off of just over 14,000 edition 9 audits. You can see there by the numbers, we've had a lot of critical non-conformances, a lot of major non-conformances. You know, one of the changes for edition 9 was reducing that score from 10 points for a major to 9. That's had an impact. We've seen more than double the number of major non-conformances under edition 9 that we saw previously. Minor non-conformances, you know, 64,000, that's a lot of minors. Exempt, not very many, that's good. You know, the fact that, you know, we're not exempting sites out of a lot of the elements, that's great. However, we are seeing a lot of not applicable. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today, just to kind of give you the idea of where we came up with this most misunderstood code elements. We do look at a lot of audit reports. And some of those elements you can tell are just misunderstood based off the information that's supplied there. They might be marked conforming, they might be marked as non-conforming, or they may even be marked as not applicable. And so, yeah, we're gonna take a look through those, okay? But first, I'm gonna introduce you to our all-star panel of auditors. So when we came up with this idea and I started thinking about who I wanted on this panel, these three are three of the best. And so definitely wanted to get their thoughts and insights on that. So I'm gonna start with Martin Fowle. He is with Mary U Nutrisciences. And so he's been auditing SQF for quite a long time, right, Martin? You know, a few years. Martin had
definitely been a few years.
Martin gets the distinction of being the last SQF auditor to audit me as an SQF practitioner before I started working with SQFI as their compliance manager. So Martin and I go way back. I've seen him in action firsthand a couple of times, and he is just really good at what he does. So next up is Chris Middleton with Bureau Veritas. Chris what year were you named Auditor of the Year?
Is it 2021 or 2020? One of those.
Yeah, one of
I
those
think it was.
virtual
Can't remember
years.
it. Time passes
Yeah.
too fast, man. I'm getting too old that it all bleeds together. It felt like yesterday I was sitting in Charlotte getting trained on SQF back in 2008. So
Oh yeah.
blink of
Been
an
a while.
eye, we are here now.
So yeah, so Chris, again, I haven't had the ability to watch Chris in action, but he and I have spent a lot of conversations about the code. So I, feel very confident that he earned that Auditor of the Year award. And that brings me up to the person batting cleanup today, Shauna Wagner with AIB. Again, Shauna, I've not seen her in action, but she's one that, if I have a question about an auditor perspective on something, I may call any one of these three to ask them what their thoughts are. So Shauna, I know you were Auditor of the Year as well. What year was that?
2019.
In San Antonio. So
yes, that is correct.
So yeah, so I've got a great group for you today. You know what? We're just going to have some conversations between the four of us. We are looking for questions as well at the end. So we'll take questions from the audience today. So please be sure and use the Q&A button to ask your questions so we can get them on the list. And we'll have plenty of time at the very end for questions. So we're going to jump right in with our most misunderstood requirement. And I'm going to let Chris talk to you about that. But 2.3.1, product formulation and realization. I will tell you that out of our data, we see that marked as NA about 17% of the time. So almost 1 in every 5 sites is marking that as NA. So Chris, tell me your thoughts on that.
Should it be? Hey, well, yeah, I don't want to take all the air out of the room here, but we could probably have a webinar that just talks only about product formalization and realization. But I want to kind of get down to some key points that are within here. And really, this truly is never really going to be not applicable at a site if you read the elements and you read the clauses properly on that side of things. You can also look at this particular clause and the subsequent elements as being the change management process that exists. So we need to be thinking about things like plan, do, check, act cycles and whatnot, which again, remember, we're doing a food safety management system here. So there is that interaction as we're moving through. And I want to call attention down at the bottom of the slide. You'll see where it talks about changes within here. So we see a lot of people say they've made no new products at the facility and everything's NA. That's not what this particular section talks about. So remember, if there's changes in ingredients, processes, packaging, how are we evaluating that in the food safety impacts? Are we connecting that through to the food safety plan? What are we doing? And this isn't just the site responsibilities that exist. So remember, we've got corporate sometimes that comes up with ideas as to what we're going to do. So we have stage gate processes that exist for product development, but there's typically always going to be an industry trial or a feasibility trial at the site level. How is that being done at the site level? But is the corporate side also being evaluated there? And always be focusing on that change and the impact that is going to hit. Real life example. I had a colleague that was at an audit one time and a change was made to an ingredient and it wasn't properly followed through with this product development and the link to the food safety plan type of thing. And they ended up doing a deep dig into specifications and ended up finding out that there was an allergen in the new ingredient that was not in the old ingredient. So now the labeling was off. And we ended up having to have a class 1 recall. This occurred up in Canada. So they did a class 1 recall and CFIA at the site had to issue that during the audit. And we ended up having a failed audit that occurred because of that. So this is all something that you should be paying attention to and understanding that it is most likely going to be applicable at your site. Remember, there's also a requirement for changes in equipment that exist in here. So read that clause in a detailed manner and don't just think, I don't do product development, so I don't need to worry about it. That is not the case here.
Yeah, and just because I didn't do a new product this year, does that get me a not applicable too?
No, it does not. So the only thing that it might do is you may have a not applicable under the records potentially because there hasn't been any sort of changes, modifications, new products. However, the processes that are established under those subsequent items that are within their 2311 through to about 2315, those most likely are all still going to be applicable. And you have to have demonstration of evidence of how that would be followed and how the system would not be impacted by changes or new products put in place. But an actual record may not be there to look at.
Perfect. Okay, now we're going to jump from change management to water. All right, so simple, basic water. There are lots of requirements around that, and we see some pretty typical answers up there, but they're usually very short answers. So I'm not really sure everybody understands what's going on. So Shauna, tell us, what are auditors and sites missing when it comes to water?
Sure. So probably like everybody, I was pretty stunned to hear that the water and ice section fell into this conversation. And I'm sure some of you that are listening are too. You're probably thinking, well, I have public water, we test it, and that's enough to meet the code, right? I mean, but it's not. It's not that simple. And so there are several items that we could touch on in this section. But I'm only allowed to have a small part of the webinar. But one that I want to touch on is non-potable water. This is one of the top clauses marked non-applicable in this section. Water in the non-potable can be reclaimed. It could be recycled water. It can be ocean water, pond water, lake water. I see quite a bit of these types of water being used, especially in the seafood processing plants. When using these types of water, it needs to be ensured that there is not any risk for cross-contamination between your potable and non-potable water systems. I have experienced many times in older facilities too, where we have water lines running overhead. And when I ask the sites what type of water is being carried, most of the times the sites don't know, or they've never even thought about the lines running overhead. So if that line happens to spring a leak, then you need to ask yourself, what are the risks and what are the consequences if that happens? Another thing that I'm seeing in water is the water treatment is another item that I see marked non-applicable. So if you have a boiler or you're treating your water with chlorine, then this section should absolutely apply to you. It needs to be ensured that your site understands the proper use of boiler chemicals, especially if you have steam that will come in contact with your food. There are FDA guidelines around this. And so for those of you that are taking notes on this webinar, you can find that in 21 CFR 173.3. And lastly, I wanted to mention too about the water contingency plan. I've seen many non-conformances written in this section, mainly due to the misunderstanding of what you need here. You need to ask yourself, what will your plant do if you use water as an ingredient, or you want to conduct sanitation and let's say your city or county is under a boil water advisory? How will your employees hand wash safely? So I often ask plants to explain to me how they would receive communication if there was a boil water advisory. If you can't answer this, then this is a great opportunity to improve your contingency plan. Always challenge and verify when it comes to water.
Great. And yeah, water is such a simple thing, but so many different aspects to it. Hand washing, people just tend to forget that. So the last one that we're going to go over to start before we get to our questions, the food quality plan. Martin said we have to talk about food quality. That food quality plan is so misunderstood. So I'm going to let Martin talk to us about that.
All right. Well, thank you, Tammy. And definitely when you asked me to do this, this was the first category that really came into mind as far as areas of the code, things within SQFI where I feel like the sites and the auditors really don't do as good of a job as we could on this one. And the first thing I would say about the quality plan is I often see that it's really only focusing on food safety risks. So the site has done their threat analysis, but when they've done it, they've only considered physical, chemical, biological hazards and haven't really delved into the rest of the hazards that don't necessarily, quality threats that don't necessarily fall into, those three categories. The second thing I notice is that a lot of the times the sites and the auditors aren't really looking at the inputs to make sure that they've been included within that threat analysis. So in a food safety plan, everyone knows you have to look at the ingredients to find, what kind of threats or hazards are coming in with those. Similarly, for the quality plan, I would expect to see that there's a threat analysis of the raw materials just to determine if there's any hazards that need to be controlled by the supplier. If there are, then is the supplier, certified against the SQF quality code or another quality standard? Just because there's a lot of differences in there that I think we're missing. Another issue I see with the quality plans would be the failure to identify the quality threats. So this really relates very closely to the first two items that I talked about. But also, taking a look at where the quality threats are happening. One of the things for this one I always look for is I ask the site, what are your top 5, customer complaint categories? If they're all quality related, then those would be items that I would look to see included within the quality threat analysis. After that, the next one would just be the identification of the CQPs themselves. A lot of times, because the matrices we use are more food safety related, a lot of times the site will end up saying, hey, we don't have anything that's critical to quality, and the auditors accept that and don't ask those questions about what's, where are the quality complaints coming from, what's happening. And by doing that, I think we're really missing the opportunity to identify those steps in the process where it is, critical to making sure finished product quality is what it needs to be. And then the final one here I listed was just the missing limits. So because quality it's not as black and white, we all know when we cook something, we have to cook it to a certain temperature, or if we're pasteurizing, there's very set limits for that. With quality, it's not exactly the same. There may be wider limits. It could be a high and a low, and just a lot of differences there where I really feel like as auditors, we're doing a disservice by not digging in a little bit further and making sure that sites really do have good quality programs in place. So I like I said, we're kind of doing this quickly, having more of a discussion, but I did want to mention the quality plan because I really feel like that's one area that we really need to improve on as a group.
Yeah, and I think our quality code in and of itself is underutilized. We have several sites that, add on the quality code, but I think there's just some great benefits to the quality code that we really overlook. And, even if you're not certified, just having that quality plan in place, I think would go a long way to helping, on the quality side of things, even if you're not, seeking that certification. So, okay.
Hey, Tammy,
I'll just add.
chime in. Go ahead, Martin. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to add to that it's not scored. So, if you do the quality, the quality certification, it doesn't have an effect on your food, your food safety certification. So that is one of the other relatively recent changes that I think really makes that quality code even more valuable.
That's a great point, Martin. So, you can get the certification just by closing out your non-conformances for the quality code without, seeing that score. Chris, you had a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to add into Martin's comments there about identifying critical quality points. And again, with that HACCP methodology, unfortunately, sometimes we've seen people take the stance of talking themselves out of critical control points on the food safety side, and that then flows over into the quality side. And you have these discussions with sites. At what point do you have a go, no go on a product as it pertains to weight, as it pertains to if there's a SKU on a label, if there's how the packaging looks? And they say, oh, if that happens, absolutely, we wouldn't ship it. And I go, so you're telling me it's critical for quality then? And they go, well, I guess you could say that, but it's not a critical quality point. Oh, no, we don't think it's critical quality point in ours because we're covering it by our GMPs. They're looking at it on the line, so it's okay. It's not critical. So we got to make sure that they're understanding what the applicability is and why we're doing it. And I do think that it's a really good point of intertwining this for brand protection. So remember, what are you using the certifications for? We're using these for brand protection. The ultimate brand protection is obviously food safety, but we can damage brands a lot by really poor quality as well. And why not have that trust with your customers increased by having this certification on that side added in. And the only other thing that I'll add into this kind of comment, because we are talking to auditors as well as sites, and this is for sites when you get to internal audits, when you're doing this certificate, this particular standard, although it is independent from the food safety code, can be audited intertwined with the food safety code. So this isn't just we walk it on the floor and we're spending 2.5 days doing a food safety audit, and then we only spend 4 hours on the quality code. There's a reason to intertwine. We don't need to backtrack. You know what I mean? Have a more methodological or methodology. I can't speak right now. I've got cotton mouth. We have a more appropriate method to move forward with your auditing style.
Absolutely. No, great points. Great points. Okay, so now we've done some talking here. We've had a brief conversation. I did hold them to limits, so to time limits. So right now is your opportunity. Put your questions in so that we can start answering those. I'm going to let Leanne cover a couple things that we just felt like you needed to have some more information on, and then we're going to come back at the end and we're going to answer hopefully all of your questions. Go ahead, Leanne.
Thanks, Tammy. So while you're chatting in your questions, because I'm sure you have your opinions of what those top non-conformances should be, but maybe they're not. So put them in there, like I was expecting food safety culture or FSVP or something like that. So just some questions perhaps around that. So feel free to chat in your questions or put them in the Q&A, and Tammy is going to collect them all. But while you're doing that, I just wanted to go over two things. Number one, I did want to introduce SQF had just launched a new online training program for risk. And so this risk bundle, you can either buy these online training programs individually or as a bundle, but it does provide some insight to these risk programs: allergen management, document control, food defense and food fraud, finished product specifications, recall and crisis management. And then Tammy and I actually did a webinar on using data on how to control risk. So there are some really good sessions in here. Feel free to scan the QR code and you'll be able to go right to the online training that we just launched. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. And next, I did want to introduce some more 365 activities. So SQF this year is hosting its 365 event. So there is not going to be a big conference in November as we typically do. Instead, we are really collecting everybody, bringing them together, all the practitioners, the sites, retailers, our service providers, and our goal is to enhance food safety in business through dialogue and discussion. So similar to what we're doing today with these webinars, we're going to have food safety digital seminars, roundtable events, in-person regional focus day. I know we're planning one with Mary U as we speak. So looking forward to all that, and even some workshops. So our next event is March 16th with Eurofins, and we're going to talk about everybody's favorite topic, food safety culture. So hopefully you can join us there. And again, scan that QR code. It's going to lead you right to the 365 page on our website, and you can see what some of our events are. So keep abreast of some of the information that we'll be sharing during this 365 event. So that's all I wanted to share with you. I'm going to bring it back to Tammy, and she's going to go ahead and answer all of your questions. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Exciting. We've got lots of events coming up, and I'm so excited about 365 and getting to come to where many of you all are. So be looking for those regional events that are going to be taking place. We've got some global activities going on. So we may be, in a city near you. So you can meet us in person and ask your questions in person. So, all right. We've got some questions coming in. Keep them coming. I'm monitoring the list, but I'm going to start with one. We can't have a webinar without talking about, food safety culture, right? Probably one of the top misunderstood code elements. So I want to hear from the panel. Are you looking for a procedure or policy? What tells you that a site has a good food safety culture? I'm going to throw it to Shauna to give me an answer, and then, if the other two have anything to chime in, they can do that as well.
Sure. Always go talk about food safety culture, but as far as a policy and procedure, am I looking for that? No, not necessarily at all. It doesn't mean that you can't have one, but I want to know what you're doing in the plant. I want to get a feel for how you are communicating, and you'll see this in the code, your food safety objectives. You're going to see that word a lot. So how are you taking those objectives from the top down and communicating them out into the facility? Are you doing it by television? Are you doing training? Maybe you're doing surveys. There's so many different ways that you can go about looking at food safety culture. And for me, when I'm auditing, one of the things that I like to do is I like to sit down the plant manager and other people of the management team and ask them, what does food safety culture mean to you? And how are you doing that in your facility? So as far as the policy and procedure, Tammy, no, I don't always look for that at all. I just get it through the audit experience.
Okay, great. Here at SQF, we talk about records, interviews, and observations. And, I always say food safety culture, real heavy in the interviews and observations. So what are people talking about? What are they doing? So no, great answer. Okay, I've got one. We've had one come into the chat. It talks about, allergens, micro, those are our top, recalls for SQF sites. Micro has been the top recall the last couple of years at SQF sites, followed very closely by allergens, mislabeling, more specifically to allergens. And, Chris, I want to get your perspective. So those don't typically show up in the top 10. So labeling doesn't show up in the top 10. Environmental monitoring doesn't show up in the top 10. So I would put them in, this misunderstood code element. Absolutely. So environmental monitoring is not mandatory. So, what do you think? Should all sites have an environmental monitoring program? Or, what are your thoughts?
So program not necessarily fully, but we can't say that entire section, that entire clause and subsequent elements are going to be not applicable, right? If we read the code, what does the code say? The code says we need to have something that is based on the R word. If you ever have an audit with me, you will get very tired of hearing me say it's based on risk. So we have to be looking at the risks that exist within there and simply stating, well, my product is going to be fully cooked by the consumer, so I don't need to worry about it. I would like to remind many people that there are some regulatory requirements for raw products that do exist within our country here that we're in right now, the United States. There's undoubtedly more globally that do exist where they are still doing environmental monitoring despite the product requiring a full cook prior to consumption. So that should not absolve you from there. That being said, maybe you will find that there is an extremely low risk to what you may need to do but that needs to be documented, and you need to have appropriate evidence that it isn't just, we've never had a problem, so we don't need to worry about it, right? Ignorance is not bliss. We need to remember that here. So we got to make sure that we have an effective evaluation of the risk that exists, good support that is present, and is there a bleed potentially into some other sections of the code where we could be looking at environmental monitoring? So are we doing things like ATP swabbing in certain areas? Are we doing things where we're even swabbing for quality items, maybe like yeasts and molds and stuff like that that could impact the quality of product? Again, I know the focus is food safety code, but there could be a bleed over on that side. So I would never say a site should be walking away from doing something. It's sort of like having that objective that says no hits in my environmental monitoring program. That sort of lines up with when I used to work for one of my previous companies that had labs, and they said their favorite situation with swabs when they came in is when they opened the bags and they smelled like chlorine or clot sanitizer, because people would spray the bag and nothing was ever positive. So, we got to make sure we are protecting ourselves. Again, brand protection is what we have in here. This is what we want to ensure. So we should not be ever seeing this entire section, going back to the main point you were asking, this ever being fully not applicable. So there may be limited testing, maybe no testing potentially, but that is based on a risk process.
Okay, great. And then to go back to the allergen piece of it. So, mislabeled product, always in the top reasons for recalls. We added some requirements in edition 9 around labeling, specifically things like label reconciliation. So, but those we're not seeing those in the top 10 non-conformances. So, what are we missing here when it comes to audits? I don't know. Chris,
Well, I think going back to where I was talking before on that first slide where we were talking about product development and changes, are we effectively managing that? And are people evaluating it properly? Again, ignorance is not bliss here. We can't sit there and assume that nothing is wrong. And to use a famous saying that many people know, I don't know who said it. I think it's Ronald Reagan, but I got no clue, but trust but verify, right? We got to make sure we're doing these items and we are CYAing ourselves, right? So we got to make sure that we are protecting the brand and we are looking at things. We don't want to have a recall. Recall is millions of dollars and impact to the brand, right? Impact to safety of personnel. So we got to make sure that we're looking at it that way and putting those evaluations as rigorous as we need to in place.
True. Okay, good. Great information. All right. So again, from our audience, and this is one we have debated internally at SQF. So we have a little bit differing opinions. Hair, is that a quality threat or a food safety hazard? Martin, you got any thoughts on that?
I was afraid you were going to call on me for this one.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully you're going to agree with me. So, but go ahead. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so I would say it could be either. Typically, I would put hair into the food safety category just because of the bacteria that's on hair. And, no one's necessarily ever gotten sick or there haven't been foodborne illnesses because of the hair itself. But what that tells me is that there's probably other problems going on if they don't have a good GMP program in place, if employee hygiene isn't, where it needs to be, if, they're wearing their hair nets into the lunchroom and then back out into the facility or outside, taking them off, putting them back on. So, it's a hard one, but I usually would score that as a non-conformance in food safety, just because of that.
They don't have it identified.
Yeah, yep.
Gotcha. Okay. Anybody else? Quick, Shauna, one word: quality, food safety.
Yeah, I think both. And for those that are working in more of the agricultural field, I would point you to the defect action level in FDA and look to see if your product actually can be allowed to have hair. And that could be something you could put into your food quality plan, CQP it, and definitely something that you can control. But I agree with Martin that, if I saw just hair, likely you're going to get a non-conformance from me. So it definitely could be in both.
Okay. All right, Chris, quick, one word.
Ditto.
All right. So the idea is that it's got to be identified because it needs to be identified because it is, an opportunity to contaminate products. So, all right, good debate there. Okay. We also have a question coming in. We've got someone here online that does instant noodles. And so they're wanting to know what are some of the CQPs that you would be looking for in the instant noodle industry there. Anybody got 2 or 3 comments on what you would be looking for?
Oh boy, it's always hard to answer that question without knowing a lot more information about it. The first thing I would suggest is take a look at what like your top 5, your top 10 complaints are related to quality, and then work my way backwards from that. So if your number 1 complaint is the noodles are broken when they, arrive at the customer, then taking a look to see within your process, how can you control that? Is it a moisture issue, a packaging issue, and really build your critical quality control point to control the threat that you're seeing at the end of the process.
Okay, good deal. I just coming from a manufacturing background, I could throw a lot of things out there, package integrity, So, getting busted packages, open, missing, if you have a flavoring packet or something in there, that may make, as Martin said, your top 5 list of non-conformances. So yeah, just looking at, what are people complaining about? And what are you seeing internally, within your site to help you identify those quality threats? No, great information. All right. So next question, let's see. So anybody that knows me knows that root cause analysis, corrective action, one of the things that I'm most passionate about. Unfortunately, we continue to see weak responses to CAPA. So what do you think? Rating sites on a scale from 1 to 10. What's your average that you're seeing in responses from sites? And I think CAPA's mentioned somewhere in like 16 different places in the food safety code. So you get in a lot of opportunity as auditors to look at corrective and preventive action. So what are you seeing? Sites, are we seeing 1s? Are we seeing sites that are, they're great at CAPA, they're at 10s, or are we somewhere, where's our average at? Shauna?
I think we're somewhere around the 5 or 6. I feel that the trend's getting better. The sites are doing corrections and they start to get into that root cause. They're getting there, but they're not digging. You're not getting all the way down like the 5 whys. Sometimes I'll just see 1-liners for a root cause. And then the big question for me is, what are you preventing? That's what you're trying to do. Prevent it from happening again. And I feel like sites are just not quite going over the hill just to get that much information and, put the time and effort into it so it doesn't happen again. Nobody likes to fill out CAPAs. It's a lot of paperwork. So if we do it right the first time and spend the time and energy, I think we can see that the industry in itself will start creeping up the ladder, maybe more towards the 7 and 8s.
Okay. Martin?
Yep. And I would just, I think Shauna hit the nail on the head with that one, where I feel like the sites do a good job with corrections, but they really miss out on the root cause analysis part of it. We see it a lot in the closure of corrective actions, but also during the audit, just, when things happen in the facility. I think there's an opportunity there for sites to better record the deficiencies along with that root cause and preventive action, just because if you're having the same thing happen over and over again, it's not helping. So yeah, I agree with Shauna, probably 4 to 5 on the scale.
Okay. Yeah. No, and I would say, yeah, looking at the audit reports that I review, I would say we're probably middle of the road at best. So I think we've got a ways to go there. So Chris, what would you rate?
I think that's an accurate statement. I was going to use the great auditor line, it depends on the facility. So it all depends. But what I would stress for anybody on the call is make sure that you go to the SQFI site and go to those guidance documents and download that corrective and preventive action guidance tip sheet that exists. Make sure you look at those. There's a tip sheet even that exists for the fundamentals section, I believe, even for corrective and preventive action. And there's some resources to look at there. And training is not always the answer.
Right. That's right. No refresher training. Okay, so we've got a question that came in. I'm gonna, I think this one's for me to start with. I don't want the person thinking I'm not gonna, put myself on the hot seat here. So if a site is in the midst of their SQF audit and they don't feel they're getting a fair audit, then what do we recommend that they do? Probably, this says most likely for Tammy to weigh in. I'll weigh in first, and if you all have anything going on, because I know all 3 of you deal very closely from a program management standpoint at your respective certification body. So for me, if a site does not feel like they're getting a fair audit, then please reach out to your certification body. Don't wait until the audit's over. But have specific reasons why. don't, just have general, it's just not going well. I don't think the auditor's being fair, be able to provide specific examples. So here's what we showed the auditor. They said it wasn't good enough. I had one that said the auditor wouldn't accept anything that had the edges of the paper that were ragged, so I mean, just some like crazy things, but have specific examples, because then the certification body, the technical manager, will more likely be able to help you at that point. But I don't know, I know all three of you deal with those types of issues. So anything that you all would add to that?
No,
Mark?
I just want to reiterate, Tammy, that it's so important that we get that information. I know a lot of times people, they don't want to cause problems. They don't want to, be a tattletale or whatever. But unless we get that information, we're not able to fix it. We're not out with the auditors as much as we'd like to be. We do shadow audits, we do witness audits. Tammy does witness audits and things like that. But the feedback from the sites is so important for us to drive continuous improvement. And I always say, if it's during the audit, reach out to us. And if you don't want us to talk to the auditor right away, we can work with you on the plan of action, but just let us know as soon as possible.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And I would remind
I would
people-
add, sorry, Tammy, go ahead.
No, yeah, I was just going to remind people that complaints can be filed anonymously with SQFI, but I would ask that you go to your CB first to file a complaint, because they are the closest to it, and they can help you at that first level. And then if you feel like it wasn't resolved, then come to SQF. I'm here, I'm available, and we can take a look at that. But yeah, I had a site the other day, they were concerned that filing a complaint would impact their audit, because their audit was still open. And so I said, no, I assure you that that is not the case. I keep the information anonymous. So I might call up Martin and say, hey, Martin, we've had a complaint on an auditor. This is what they said happened. And, and in some cases, Martin may say, hey, we had that same complaint from another site, so we're addressing it. So, but absolutely, there are lots of ways, and don't feel like that you can't reach out because it may impact your audit, because we do everything we can to make sure that that does not happen. And they're free to request that auditor not come back, correct? So absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yep. And I know in some cases, corrective actions have even been closed out by some of the panelists that you see here, if there was an issue between the site and the auditor. So there are some things that we can do to protect the integrity of that audit. Chris, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, remember that we as CBs are partners with you. We're not regulators. We're not here to drop the hammer and make your life difficult. We're trying to give you value-added audits and that improve your brand, that improve your food safety and quality management systems. And as Martin sort of said, we'd love to be out on every audit with these people, but you sometimes are our eyes and ears, and we need to get this valuable feedback so it doesn't cause any issues within the rest of the industry and potentially damage our brand as a CB, damage SQF's brand, but also allows you to feel the value add in these audits on that front, which is what you want to see on this end.
Absolutely. We have a follow-up question to the 2.3.1 product formulation and realization. So we've got someone asking, if the site has policies for new equipment, new ingredients, new products, new packaging, does that meet the requirements? And I'm just going to go ahead, Chris, and say it depends. Does anyone want to elaborate on that? So are you looking for something more than just if we have a new ingredient, because they said everything's new. So anybody want to re-emphasize existing stuff that may change? Chris?
Again, there would have to be a dive into seeing if there have been any modifications and the adherence to those particular procedures and policies that are established, and are they properly linking to the food safety management system and components that exist. So you're still wanting to see, is there a link to the applicable changes within specifications that may be required? Has there been modifications or verifications in place, and is there a tie to looking at the food safety plan, and how would that occur, and potentially the food quality plan as well as it would look at. So again, it does depend. It is nice to have policies and procedures, but we also want to see, does even product development, if you have that group there, are they aware of them? Do they know what they need to do? Are you still talking to people to determine? Are you still evaluating? It's still, we're living with Rio, right? We got to play our Duran when we're going on that, to make sure that we know what's going on, right? So
exactly, showing that connection there.
Mhm.
Okay. So what's your opinions on glove use when handling raw ag products, food contact surfaces before kill steps? So does the risk for foreign material outweigh the biological risk? That's a tough one. What are your
I think it
opinions?
depends on, I'll throw in there, I think it depends on what you're dealing with, and are you using the glove? Are you trying to use it as a food safety control? Or are you trying to use it as a personnel control and sanitation control, right? You know, if you're handling something where that has a heavy film, or like that's extremely oily or something along those lines, or extremely soiled, you may be using gloves, but not for a food safety precaution. And again, you should be inspecting, regardless of it raw, ready to eat. Disposable gloves or reusable gloves are to be inspected to ensure that they are not causing a food safety concern. And glove use is not eliminating hand washing. So we have to remember that we still have to have these practices in place, that we aren't posing a risk. Again, the risk level is a little bit lower if you're doing pre-kill step and there's an intended kill step that is to occur at the site. But still, I think you need to evaluate, what is the purpose of the glove? What is the action that is going to be used with that glove? And does it pose a risk? Like putting a nitrile glove over a chainmail glove and cutting fish, does that make a lot of sense? You know, maybe not, because you'll end up finding out you have blue pieces in your fish products, right? So you may need to look at those things. So that's my stance on that.
Yeah, I have to echo that, Chris. I think you completely got that question. What is the glove used for? What is it for? Again, is it film? Are you just protecting your hands? What is it? And does it cause you the risk? Do the risk assessment. You have to risk assess it.
Right. And you're not looking at it as a scale. So biological, versus, physical, it's a hazard it could be a hazard for both. So it's not, does one outweigh the other to start with? You have to first identify it as a hazard for potentially both, to determine what mitigating factors you're going to put in. But that's just me. I'm just throwing that out there for you guys. Okay.
Remember,
all right.
11.3.3.1, everybody, if you got module 11 in your audits, right? And it says the site shall, like we remember those shalls and shoulds, right? Shall undertake a risk analysis of the clothing and hair policy that protects things. So that could even include gloves and things like that. So you want to look at that. That's intertwined into those areas. So we should be looking at those items.
Absolutely. All right. Next question. Validation and verification. Hello, misunderstood. So everybody's confused about validation and verification. So do any of you all have any tips or techniques for how you all, keep those straight in your mind, or how you train auditors? Martin, you want to start on that one?
So I'm going to go back to many years ago when I first got trained to do SQF audits. And the way it was described is, verification is ensuring you're doing what you say you're doing, what the program says, and then validation is the proving that that's an effective control for the food safety hazard. Typically for verification, it's a lot more record reviews, direct observations, kind of inspecting just to make sure everything is happening the way it's supposed to. For validation, I do think there's a weakness out there where I see quite often where a site will have a scientific paper that they use as the validation. I would say that's part of the validation, but also important is to make sure that it works within your system, that your equipment is the same as what was used for the study, that your monitoring practices, your frequency, and all of that have also been considered within validation. So I think we have room to improve in the validation section.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. Martin, we're going to sign you up for edition 10 to write the definitions for verification and validation. I thought that was very well said.
All right, we've got to have Shauna or Chris do the high risk then for me.
Okay, that's right. Martin
MVP
wants
for
a
that, yeah.
definition for high risk.
Not it, I touch my nose. No, I would agree with Martin there on his definitions that he gave there. The way that I kind of explain it when people are asking is, will it work and am I doing it?
Absolutely.
That's essentially where it's at. And Martin has had a great point in there of taking the validation studies, the publicly available validation studies, and referencing them to your process and products and equipment. You know, great idea as well. CPG 555.425, right? Our foreign material one, 7 to 25 millimeters. Everybody loves using that document to help out. But are we validating that the metal detectors or the x-rays are effective within the products properly, right? Are we doing it? Did we read it clearly that that's talking really more so about adults and not about cats and children and whatnot? And it's for healthy individuals. So we got to remember these things. So we can't just pull things that are off the shelf always and use them. We have to validate, funny enough there, appropriately for our processes, right? So.
Right. Okay. No, great point. Let's see what's next. So, internal audit program. I still see people that don't fully understand that. And I will tell you, I see non-conformance, or I see audit statements where it says that the only internal auditor is the SQF practitioner. Good, bad, non-conforming? What do you think, Chris?
So 2542 talks about that people need to be independent where practical. Obviously, we have many sites that are small vendors where it makes that difficult. But the question that I pose to everybody in the attendees and the millions upon millions that'll be listening to the recording is the person who is overseeing a program, are they going to be the most effective person at auditing the implementation of the program per the requirements that exist within the food safety and quality management system and to the requirements of the SQF code? So remember, the SQF code wants to see that you are using a checklist, the SQF checklist or a similar tool. So we want to be looking at those things. This is your number one way to protect yourself, is to be thoroughly evaluating your adherence to the code requirements. Not everything should be done in one day. Not everything should be done just once a year. We have to look at that. What's that R word, everybody? Everybody say with me, risk. That's right. Everybody gets a little Kit Kat bar thrown at them. But you need to make sure you're evaluating and protecting yourself there and looking at who is auditing those programs. Maybe the SQF practitioner has oversight to the program and isn't doing day-to-day, so maybe they can effectively evaluate it, but you got to see what is that person's role in the implementation of the system. And you know what, look at those networks that you're in, look at those groups, maybe similar processes or companies that you've worked with in the past, and maybe get somebody else and do cross auditing in ways maybe on that front if that's working. I've seen that work at a number of small vendors in the past and see what can be done. The answer might not necessarily be, oh, we got to go out and hire a consultant. I understand many people use those and they are effective. But we also want to see, maybe you can look at the industry and see if they can help you out, and look at those food associations that are regional, and maybe people can help you out on that front, on that side. But I would say this is a key area that I think more people can be much more robust and be a harsher critic on your end. You want to be as harsh as possible and drive that continuous improvement. And we want to put those preventive actions in place as well to eliminate, don't just fix the little thing, let's prevent it from happening again. So when Martin shows up, he doesn't give you a real hard time because it happened again. Not that he would ever do that.
No,
and that's
never.
what I wanted to say too, is you have to score yourself hard. There's so many internal audits that I see where I just feel that plants are not doing their their due diligence. They're just write a one-liner down. Yes, I saw this procedure. Great. But it still needs to be your tool. I'm still seeing, and Chris and Martin, maybe you are too, where plans are writing down, well, you know, this can be a continuous improvement, and it's really a minor, and maybe it's a major, but because they've marked it under something else, an observation, if anyone remembers that word, I try not to bring that up,
Oh,
but
yeah.
I'm still seeing it. So you'll mark it as an observation, and then it gets put in the corner. And yet then we get to the audit and we're still seeing, you know, these non-conformances where you could have taken an action, but you didn't. So please use that internal audit to really, really judge yourself.
Exactly. No, great point.
I'm just going to add in real quick. I don't know how many auditors are listening in or will listen in on this, but as an auditor, if we see an internal audit where everything's been marked as okay, but we get out there and we find a lot of non-conformances, it may be something to go back to and say, hey, was this internal audit actually effective? And there could actually be a non-conformance within the internal audit program as well.
That is a great point, Martin.
Oh,
Just checking
absolutely.
the box saying
Mhm.
I did it doesn't meet the requirements of the code. It has to be effectively implemented. So no, great point there. Let's talk about annual management review. So, you know, sites have to have an annual management review that covers that whole list of things that's in 2121. But at the same time, they also are supposed to do monthly updates between the practitioner and senior site leadership. So is this confusing to sites? Do they understand that there are two different things going on here? And what are you all seeing? What can we do to get that understanding out?
So
Martin?
I would definitely say there is some confusion out there. A lot of sites really look at them as being the same thing. What I always try to explain is the annual management review should be an assessment of the effectiveness of your food safety management system. You know, was it working? A lot of trend analysis, a lot of looking at the big picture. You know, the monthly updates are great for the regular communication, kind of the day-to-day operations, but at least once a year, taking a step back and saying, okay, over the last year, how have we done? You know, has our pest control program been effective? You know, what are our environmental monitoring results? And I always say a good management review has all of those details. It has the trend analysis, the, you know, summary from the year and all of that type of stuff. The monthly communication could just be, you know, kind of what's happening, regulatory changes, and kind of the down and dirty stuff.
Yeah, I always look at it like the annual thing is that reflection back on the previous year, and the monthly updates are kind of what, like you said, what's going on now. So what have we just gone through, and what do we have coming up? You know, Martin Fowle's coming next week to do our SQF audit, and you know, are we ready for that? So it's the here and now versus, you know, reflecting back on those trends. No, that's a great way to say that. Okay, let's see, a couple more things before we go. First of all, I will just give a reminder that this is being recorded, so you can rewatch us all again and see, you know, what all we had to say. I'm gonna try to get in one more question here at the end. You know, food legislation, we've had a lot of changes in food legislation over the last year. We've got some big ones coming up being implemented. So, you know, what are we looking for to see that sites are keeping up with those changes? How are they demonstrating that to us? This is one area that I see that, you know, sites are missing the mark in keeping up with all the changes that are going on. So any tips for how you all keep up with regulatory changes? Anything you're subscribed to, or things like that? I'll let Shauna go first.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing that we know is true, food law is always changing, and it's always going to be that way. But there are so many resources out there for both sites and auditors that you can utilize, whether it be webinars, magazine subscriptions, your FDA, USDA alerts, conferences. We talked about the 365. The key point here is stay active, be involved. And if you're not, you're going to fall behind, and you're going to do it quickly because there are things changing every single day. And just again, real life experience here. One of the questions that I ask in my audits is about the new allergen sesame, and there's been quite a few plants that did not know, and that's scary. So that's the tip I have.
Yeah, and and just to add to that, not even regulatory changes. We had a lot of sites that had no idea that Edition 9 was in effect of the code when it came out. So keeping up with SQF changes as well, because we had those, the medical screening addition and things like that. So keeping up with changes. And we've talked a lot about change management today. So we're in our last minute before we sign off and say goodbye to all the people that hung with us today. Any parting words for anybody, when it comes to misunderstanding the code, what can they do? If they just don't understand something. Chris, I'll start with you.
Number one, obviously you want to make sure you have the code readily available. And I would say the one thing that the SQF is great at is providing those free resources. So get those guidance documents. If you don't see a guidance document for edition 9, lean back to 8.1 and look at what the clause and the element requirements are listed, and look at those previous guidance documents and move off of those. I'll add one thing to Shauna's comments, which were great about legislation. Consider those local industry groups and industry associations for assistance as needed, or assistance if you want to pronounce it properly. But make sure that you are getting as much experience as possible, and do not, I repeat, do not be scared to ask your certification body for clarification. We are permitted to clarify items. We just cannot tell you how to do things. So that's the main thing. Make sure you have a good understanding and work with your partner on that front, which is your CB.
Okay. Shauna, parting words for the group?
Yeah, I just gotta reiterate what Chris said on that is obviously we can't tell you how to do things, but that doesn't mean that we can't clarify it or give you a better understanding of what that code element means. I point people to the resources on the website a lot. They're very well done. And if you've not checked those out, you definitely should.
Absolutely. Agreed. Martin, what have you got?
I mean, I don't know what to add to that. I think Chris and Shauna have both, kind of explained it perfectly with, the SQF does provide a lot of resources through the website. So definitely appreciate that. The CBs, we issue regulatory updates, newsletters, and things like that. And I say subscribe to all of them. I mean, you can always skim through the headlines, and if it's something that is applicable, interests you, you can click on it, read more. Otherwise, file it away, delete it, and wait till the next day's information to come. But thanks.
Great. Yeah. So thank everybody for joining us today, and some great questions came in, and great job for my panelists here. I knew they did that all-star job that I would expect them to do. So sorry we couldn't do this in person in Orlando, but maybe in the future we'll get the all-star panel back together. My final thought is what I always say: read the code. That will help a lot. Read the code. But thank you all very much.